All right, good morning, everybody. I have a bit of an earlier video today. I'm a little crunched for time these next 2 days, so going to try to, I guess, make these videos in any free time that I can, since there are 8 of them to make. And after the very exciting final day of the NBA regular season, we finally know what the playoff matchups are going to be and what the seeding ended up being. Really quick, there were two coach firings that occurred this morning. The Knicks are moving on from Jeff Hornacek, and the Orlando Magic have dropped Frank Vogel after a 25-57 season in which they finished 14th in the Eastern Conference. So, two job openings have started. I know Mark Jackson's name has been discussed as somebody that could potentially fill the vacancy for the New York Knicks, but that'll, of course, be something that is looked at further down the road. So, for the first of the 8 series previews, I'm going to be looking at the Toronto Raptors and the Washington Wizards. The 1-versus-8 matchup in the Eastern Conference. The Raptors are coming off of a season in which they were the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. Last season, they faced the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round. They ended up beating them in 6 games en route to a sweep, in which they lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And that was, of course, a series in which Raptors did not have Kyle Lowry. So that was, of course, something that played an impact there. But I think despite this being a 1-versus-8 matchup, and despite the Raptors being as good as they were all year, ended up finishing 59-23. And what's really, really impressive about this Raptors team is that they really do have a championship formula in place. And I think if you're looking at all of the big numbers that matter, they averaged nearly 112 points a game at 111.7. That was 4th in the NBA. Their opponent points per game was 103.9. That was 7th. Their offensive rating was 113.8. That was 2nd. And their defensive rating was 105.9, which was 5th. So they have a top 5 offense and a top 5 defense. I mean, and you look at their bench and all of the secondary scoring that they have, and it really, really is incredible. I mean, you had 5 people on the team that averaged more than 10 points a game. It's pretty crazy. The Fred VanVleet actually only averaged 8.6 points a game because, I mean, you go back and think about it, and you looked at how productive he was, and he averaged 1.4 threes made a game. And I think that has also been a big difference in what has helped the Raptors develop this new style of play that has led them to be a different team. And now we finally reach that time of the year where we get to figure out, like, are they really different? Like, is this really a new Raptors team, or is it going to be a lot of what we've seen before in the playoffs? And I think there's a lot of pressure on the Raptors for that. For that reason, the Boston Celtics are without Kyrie Irving for the postseason. The Cleveland Cavaliers, while they obviously still have LeBron James playing the best basketball in his life, you can very much so argue, and I definitely think this season you can argue was his best season. The Cavaliers are simply not the team that they were the year before. So the Raptors have a lot of pressure on them that, they really are this good. I mean, this is a team that this year, ranked 3rd in the NBA in 3-point attempts, 4th in the NBA in 3-pointers made. And their team percentage wasn't as good, but that just wasn't a big part of the Raptors game before. And a big part of that is DeMar DeRozan shooting threes now. And of course, the acquisition of CJ Miles, who was a very high volume 3-point shooter. And then you have Serge Ibaka, who shot a lot more threes this year. That is certainly a very principal part to their game. And in fact, they're 25th in the NBA in 2-point attempts. So they're not really going to be attacking the rim as much as a lot of other teams, particularly the Washington Wizards, who are one of the teams that really do attack the rim a lot and have a lot of weapons that can get baskets up close. But I mean, you look down the line at this Raptors team, 2nd in blocks, 6th in assists. And what's really impressive is that their year-to-year growth in assists went up 31.5%. And I think that is really what tells the story of how this Raptors team changed. It's not just it's no longer, the strategy for them can no longer be just keep DeMar and Kyle in check and everything should be okay, barring a superstar performance from a role player. But this year, there's just so much more ball movement. I mean, between DeRozan, who was really never a passer averaged 5.2 assists per game this year. And then Kyle Lowry averaging 5.6 rebounds and 6.9 assists. I mean, this is a team that just found so many ways to move the ball. And I think particularly in comparison with the Washington Wizards, that's something that I think the Raptors probably do better. And a lot of that is going to depend on how into it John Wall is, how close to 100% he is in the series. And I think that'll play a huge role in how all of this plays out. But at the same time, I mean, the Raptors, they really are stacked. This is an excellent basketball team, and they're an incredibly consistent team. They have been all year. They have no reason to not succeed in the playoffs. And it's for those reasons that there's still a high degree of skepticism into how this team will perform. But I mean, you look at everybody they've been able to beat, how they've been able to win games, how much they've dominated on their home floor, which I think as the playoffs move on, if they're able to advance and end up playing, Cleveland, that can actually, serve as a problem for them. So, I mean, those just because of the height and pressure of playing LeBron James with home court advantage. But I do think that the Raptors are extremely well suited heading into the playoffs and heading into the series. I mean, this is a team that has been really exciting to watch the whole year. They brought in a different style of play that they really just haven't identified with before, and it's worked out extremely well. And of course, in the Coach of the Year debate, which has so many people that you can throw into it, Dwayne Casey certainly has to be near the top of that list, leading this team to a 59-23 record. Everybody knew they were going to be good, but I don't think anybody anticipated them being the one seed in the Eastern Conference and being in such an excellent position to really be able to make a deep playoff run. They went to the conference finals 2 years ago. Last year, of course, they had their run cut short, getting swept by the Cavaliers. But this year, there is a lot more confidence that that is something that will start to change. And, it's going to be really exciting to see how that happens, especially against a Washington Wizards team that had very high expectations coming into the season. Now, taking a look at them, they finished 43-39. They, of course, had plenty of injury problems along the way that certainly played a very big role into how this team managed their way through the season. I think especially when looking into the context of John Wall, he played half a season. He played 41 games. So when you have your best player only play half the season, that certainly presents a lot of difficulty in how you're going to attack them, what systems you're going to use. And for a very large portion of the year, Thomas Satoransky was the starting point guard for the Wizards, and he did an excellent job in that role. He only averaged 3.9 assists per game, but he was also only coming in at 22 and a half minutes a game. But he started 30 games for them, and he was a really, really important placeholder. And for a period of time, there was a little bit of locker room drama because the Wizards were really liking this new sense of identity that they had without John Wall in place, saying that they moved the ball better without him. There was, some talk between Marcin Gortat and John Wall, some Twitter beef going on between the two at that period of time. And that was, of course, probably counterproductive, especially considering the kind of player that John Wall is, and that still he averaged 9.6 assists per game this year. And I think that's what makes this series unpredictable and difficult for the Toronto Raptors. It's because you can look on paper, I'm looking at the numbers right now. The Wizards, they're middle of the pack in points per game and opponents' points per game and offensive rating and defensive rating and pace. They are, by all of those metrics, simply a mediocre team. They were 43-39. This was a team a year ago that was the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. It was healthy, that looked really good, that made their way through that first round series against Atlanta in 6 games. And then they couldn't close it out against the Boston Celtics. And while they never led in that series, it was in 7 games. They were extremely competitive. They got an extremely exciting win in game 6 of that series, thanks to a John Wall shot. And they looked to be really poised to be one of the teams that would be in control of the Eastern Conference the following season. And to see that not happen, and while they really were never in danger of missing the playoffs, I think at the same time, they did not anticipate being an 8 seed, even with the injuries that they have dealt with. And the other injury question that they have heading into this series is the issue with Otto Porter Jr. and his calf injury. He's nursing a calf strain right now. He does not know if he's going to play in game one, but he should be able to return at some point in the series. And there's also questioned availability for Mike Scott and his concussion. And he's been a very, very important bench piece for that team. So if there's injury factors that the Wizards have to deal with, it's going to be more difficult. But the Wizards are, of course, a different type of basketball team. This is by all means a different style of play. And as I previously alluded to, with the Raptors being primarily a three-point shooting team, while the Wizards shot more threes in volume this year, and actually are an extremely skilled team as far as percentage goes. They were only 21st in the league in three-pointers and 23rd in three-pointers attempted. And I feel like a lot of that may have to do with Scott Brooks, who's just more of an old school coach. And I think if we remember back to the Thunder teams that he coached, I mean, the volume of three-pointers that Kevin Durant takes and Russell Westbrook especially takes is really increased in the systems that they've played without him. But, Scott Brooks is certainly a defensively minded coach and somebody that also his offensive strategies often don't revolve around what the game has kind of made the norm recently. But with that being said, having guys like Otto Porter, who shot 44% from three, and John Wall, who even shot 37% in his half a season, Bradley Beal, who shot 37.5%. Tomas Satoransky shot 46.5% when he played, and Mike Scott shot over 40%. I mean, just a lot of guys that, even though they don't shoot a lot of them, they know how to engineer open looks. And when that happens, they really know how to make it go down. 37.5% was their team three-point field goal percentage. That's fourth in the NBA. So while that's not their primary mode of getting points, it is something you have to look out for. And then, of course, how well they move the ball. They were fourth in assists this year. And I think when you're comparing that to the Toronto Raptors, who were sixth, talking about how much the Raptors move the ball. But I think no matter who's been the point guard this year, the Wizards have found a way to move the ball, and that is how they're able to win games a lot, especially because they're really just not the team that they thought they were, which is surprising, especially considering that this is pretty much entirely a returning cast. I mean, these are players from last year's roster for, the vast majority of them. And it does become kind of surprising when that doesn't really translate into another successful season. But of course, they did deal with the injuries, and they're still in a position to where they have a playoff series against a team that it's no textbook 1-versus-8 scenario. And I think that's what makes it really interesting, is that this is not your typical 1-8 series. I think this Wizards team, especially with the experience from not just last year, but, even though they missed the playoffs in 2016, if you go back to 2015 and 2014, where they were knocked out in the conference semifinals, I mean, you go back then, that's still John Wall and Bradley Beal. I mean, this is a backcourt, and that's what's going to be the big story of this series, a battle of the backcourts between Lowry, DeRozan, and Wall and Beal. I mean, 4 all-stars on the floor at once there, and it's going to be really exciting. And even the big man duel between Marcin Gortat and Jonas Valanciunas, the latter of whom has had a career season. So the individual matchups that we're going to see on the floor, just the talent differential is almost non-existent. And even when you go to the bench, and the Raptors bench, which has received rave reviews all year for how they've been able to, keep their team in game when their starting lineup has been struggling, but even beyond that, just becoming one of the most productive benches in the league, and having guys like Pascal Siakam and CJ Miles and Fred VanVleet and DeLon Wright, who have all just played such an insane role on that team. I think even when you look at the Wizards bench, there are bench pieces that may not always bring that with the same level of consistency, but I think if we're still looking at just pure talent differential, it's really not that big of a difference between Mike Scott and what Kelly Oubre is capable of doing. And then, you have Jody Meeks, who's a great shooter. And then you have to move Tomas Satoransky to the bench. And all of these things, once you start adding those up on top of a pretty solid starting five, when, you look at Wall, Beal, Porter, Morris, and Gortat, I mean, it's close. Like, it'll be an interesting series, but I just think that the Toronto Raptors this year have too much going on. I think their changed identity and especially how well they play at home is going to play to their benefit in this series. They're just not a team that you can attack the same way. And I think that is the thing. The scariest thing about this Raptors team is that there have been so many games where Lowry and DeRozan have just been very underwhelming, and the Raptors will still win by 15. I think it's one of those things where the Wizards have to look out for that. But on the flip side, I think Bradley Beal is the best scorer on the floor in this series. And that's saying something because DeMar DeRozan has had such an incredible season. But if there's one guy that I think is the most capable of taking a game over in crunch time, it's going to be Bradley Beal. He's shown an ability to hit big shots in the past. And I think especially on the road, he's somebody that they're going to make a big effort to get the ball to in big situations. So I think that'll be a really, really exciting matchup, specifically the one between Beal and DeRozan. And then the coaching duel between Dwayne Casey and Scott Brooks will also be very exciting. Two coaches that are really looking to take the next step, make their way to the NBA Finals. And it'll be a really, really exciting series. And just in general, I will spoil this for my future videos. I do have all my predictions in place. I obviously haven't done all the videos. That's my first one. But I don't think there will be any first round sweeps this year. I think that all of the series, the talent difference is close enough to where even in the series to where it looks like it could potentially be a sweep. It's just so very possible that the other team can win a game. So I think that's what's really exciting. But I do like the Wizards. I like their chances to make this extremely competitive. I think it will be extremely competitive. I certainly don't think they'll be swept. I don't think it'll be a short series. I think that this backcourt is at least going to win a couple of games. And I think that that's what it's going to come down to. But at the end of the day, the Toronto Raptors are just too much better of an offensive unit as a whole. They're just a more cohesive unit as a team. I mean, if you look at how good their defense is, I think that is going to present real difficulties for the Washington Wizards throughout the series. And while I do think that there's going to be, a game or two where Bradley Beal takes control, I think that the Raptors at the end of the day just offer too much. And where they do have the edge, where they don't have the edge in talent, I should say, they do have the edge in consistency. And that has been, that is the model that you kind of have to trust at this time of year, especially with how well that they have played at home. So I'm feeling Raptors in 6 on this one. I think it'll be a good series, but I do think that the Toronto Raptors will make it to the second round of the playoffs for the third consecutive year. That'll be it. Yep. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Pick and Pop, and we'll be back later on this afternoon. My next video, I'll take a look at the 1-8 matchup in the West, the Rockets and the Timberwolves. But that's all I have for you right now. Have a good rest of your morning. That's it.